So now we have light, just a few conventions. We're supposed to keep our masks, but when we speak, we can take it off. And we'll have a bit of presentations, and then we'll have enough time for discussion, and then we'll pass around the mics. Okay? So welcome all of you to this special roundtable of the Intercontinental Academia number 4, which is dedicated to intelligence and artificial intelligence. The work of this academia has started last June. It started here, but also in the cyberspace, and we all met there. The academia is composed of a fantastic set of fellows who are the brilliant minds who will help us progress in the domain of intelligence and artificial intelligence. And for that, they are mentored by a brilliant group of more senior scientists whom I will not have the time to present in detail. They have all the greatest world scientific prizes. They're super smart. They're in charge of the largest and most prestigious institutions. You all know this. And what is important is that all these participants collectively have been working from June onwards on the cyberspace in Slack and also in our virtual environment. Now we are all meeting for 10 days of intensive work in Paris. It starts early, and as I understand, it finishes only late in the night. And it has started last Monday, and it will end in Paris on the 27th, that is next Wednesday, and then we'll work again online on the projects that the fellows will present on next Wednesday, and then we'll work again in the cyberspace until we meet again in Belo, Horizonte, in Brazil, in Minas Gerais, next June, and perhaps the work will continue afterwards, because I think intelligent and artificial intelligence are topics that will not stop in June 2022. So the name of the game today is, and what we have asked the mentors to do is to give their views about what are the important challenges for artificial intelligence in the next 2 decades. And this is an exercise that says, of course, work in progress. And it will be the opportunity to discuss, all of us, because we have all the fellows and also friends and colleagues in the room. And we hope after this discussion, but also after the continued work of this academia, to be able to present something like a manifesto, or at least a list of what people who have deep thought collectively on the topic think what should be the directions of research in this domain, of research and perhaps also of legislation, of debates, and who knows, of industry. The way we're going to do this, because we couldn't all be here on the scene. Some people, some of us have just sent what they think, and this will be read by colleagues. So we will both present what we personally think, but also read what other people colleagues have sent us, and we'll do this simply in alphabetical order, and we'll to be short enough so that there is enough time for discussion. I hope this is okay. And so we will start with what Ada Jonat thinks, and Marc Mézard will tell us.
So it's a contribution by Ada Jonat entitled AI and Grand Challenges in Life Sciences. Recent years witnessed a major, highly astonishing and rather unexpected revolution in understanding and conceptualizing life owing to the introduction of AI. Proteins are essential to life, supporting practically all biological functions. They are large complex molecules made up of chains of 21 amino acids that are folded based on their sequence and local conditions. A protein's shape and its potential alterations enable its function, which depends largely on its unique 3D structure and mobility. Thus, the specific protein characteristics enable not only their basic functions, such as digestion, inhaling, and growth, but also molecular docking, the introduction to neural networks, intellectual interactions, etc. Figuring out protein shapes is being performed experimentally since mid-20th century by nuclear magnetic resonance, X-ray crystallography, and the newer cryo-electron microscopy, all time-consuming and extensive trial-dependent laboratory techniques. In 1994, when less than 1,000 protein structures were known, realizing the experimental shortcomings, Professor John Moult and Christoph Fiedels founded CASP, a biennial blind critical assessment of protein structure prediction, to catalyze research in structure, function, biological and medicinal aspects, based on learning how to discover the delicate balance of many weak forces that dictate the global minimum of protein structures, dynamics and function. In this effort, protein structures were predicted and compared to experimental structure determination performed elsewhere in parallel, and its average success for over 2 decades until 2016 was around 40%. However, the numerous functionally meaningful conformations of proteins with known particular structures, around 180,000, alongside the enormously large number of proteins with still unknown structures, larger than 2 million, still posing a grand challenge in biology. Around 5 years ago, an extraordinary academic achievement based on AI, which influences the entire life science field, was released. It is called AlphaFold, a system that generates 3D models of proteins as an open source package that provides an implementation of intraprotein contacts prediction. Its future is overexciting, with a success rate of almost 100%. Nevertheless, this impressive achievement is not supposed to stand alone. Among the main challenges ahead for artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques are executing molecular docking, design therapeutics, and drug discovery. It also has huge implications in advanced areas such as modeling complex diseases like diabetes and Alzheimer's. I think that in less than 10 years, this will be the way that complex biology is understood and even implicated. And of course, by aggregation from the vast available literature, many other structural biology applications, starting with expression data variation and creation of complexes, introduction to neural networks, collecting AI-based information on molecular dynamic simulations. In fact, this breakthrough demonstrates the impact that AI can have on various scientific discoveries and its potential to dramatically accelerate progress in some of the most fundamental fields. Thus, in addition to developing treatments for diseases, it will provide scientific tools for many of the world's greatest challenges, like local and global environmental issues, including finding enzymes that break down industrial waste.
Thank you very much. So that was Ada's contribution. And Jay, do you want to follow? Yes, to say what your challenges are.
I thought I was coming later. So
well, actually, I just realized that there was a mistake in the alphabetical order, and that Shimon should come later. So you're next. Yeah.
well, at least I understand a little bit more about the concept of alphabetical order and how it's been violated. Take off my mask. I'm happy to take off my mask. I need a couple more seconds to organize my thoughts here. But let me start like this. I think that the contribution that we just heard about in protein folding represents the kind of part of the problem that science faces, where neural networks have their greatest opportunity. And when we use the word AI, we are nowadays actually talking about systems that have neural networks somehow at their core, right? So these are systems that are essentially massive extensions of statistical prediction engines. This microphone is less than perfect, isn't it? Maybe it's my inherent lispiness. No, I don't know. Anyway, so let's think about that point, right? So I believe that natural language and proteins have a lot in common. And I want to communicate that, but you know, you're gonna have to tell me how long I should rattle on for. You know, you guys know I could start. If I start to 3 minutes, oh, okay, well I should stop already because I'm finished. So let me try to be succinct about this. The kinds of regularities that are going to turn out to govern what happens in proteins are subtle, continuous, and complex. And they're very, very difficult to characterize in the way that we traditionally write down expressions to capture quantitative relationships in science, right? So we write expressions like E equals mc squared or even Y equals mx plus b, and these are precise ways of characterizing relationships. But in actual real scientific problems such as protein folding, the complexity of the interactions are such that it's not possible to write them down in this way. And so the engines that are solving these problems are engines that are using neural networks, which happen to be really good engines for exploiting higher order subtle statistical interdependencies that are very, very difficult to capture explicitly. And what I think a central challenge is for the idea of actually building systems that have intelligence comparable to ours is to have them go from just representing those statistics in these ways where they make the right predictions but nobody knows why, to being like us in that they can benefit from explicit explanation and explicit representation of relationships in quantitative or symbolic form to complement that ability. And so, you know, Poincaré actually wrote this beautiful little quote that I encountered on a park bench. It says, "It is by logic that we prove, but by intuition that we discover." And the protein folding thing is that intuition discovery thing. The neural networks are not doing the by logic that we prove part very well yet, nor are they able to talk with us and explain to us how they're doing what they're doing. And I think, to me, that is the exciting challenge. So that was a bit more than 3 minutes, I guess, but I guess. Okay, I'm done.
So I'm speaking for my colleague Karen Young from Birmingham University. So she said, my top 2 challenges are achieving the legal and cultural and organizational framework that will ensure appropriate governance of data and governance of artificial intelligence in a way that we will be widely accepted as ensuring appropriate protection for individual and organization in a way that broadly align with core values upon which liberal democratic society are grounded, so as to enable individuals, group, and the community at large to benefit from the value of data-driven technology, including artificial intelligence. So first of all, the data governance challenge, achieving this, first the data governance challenge is achieving this. Achieving this will be one of the greatest challenge of the new digitized and datafied era into which we are transitioning, given the unique properties of that digital data. Permanence, instantaneously reproducible without loss of quality at scale. Hence, the marks that we now leave in our digital trace have vastly different implications from the paper trails of an analog world. Compare, for example, the criminal record stored on a little card kept in a local police office that testified to the exuberance of youth, and the single Kodak photo of a naked photo sent by a person to a lover. At the same time, we have the reliable and trustworthy institutional mechanism for ensuring and guaranteeing the provenance, accuracy, and condition under which data set up have been collected, and that they are being utilized to create algorithmic models which are fit for purpose, so that the resulting prediction appropriately and meaningfully represent the phenomena that they are claimed by the creator to represent. Sorry. The second is the governance of artificial intelligence challenge. The highly sophisticated, opaque, yet powerful capacity of these techniques and their unbending into a myriad of social application has already demonstrated that their adverse consequences for individual groups and for communities. No doubt there will be many that we have not yet properly identified or understood, particularly as new applications emerge and new vulnerabilities and problems are created. They are increasingly embedded into complex social technical systems that display emergent properties which are unstable and therefore uncertain. While these technologies have already delivered valuable benefits at the individual and collective level, many promises are made about their capabilities. Yet, whether these promises will be translated into real-world benefits of the kind that are promised remain a very open question. History has shown just that on many occasions. This is particularly problematic in question of artificial intelligence application that are dependent upon data collected through the continuous and persuasive hyperveillance of individual behavior and activities in a way that are already used in a way that are contrary to the interests, welfare, and autonomy of persons.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me try to explain the situation as I see it. I will take a comparison, a starting point, which is heat engines. Heat engines existed, they were built gradually during the 17th century, and it took about 150 years before thermodynamics was created. Actually, the book by Carnot was published, I think, in 1824. It will be, in 2 years, it will be the anniversary of thermodynamics. And some of you may know the sentence of Einstein, who said that it was the most perfect theory ever drawn and most impressive. And I say that because it means that for 150 years we have developed a technology which was changing the society deeply. I mean, it was the beginning of the new industrial age, and this technology was built without much theoretical knowledge. So this is doable. At the same time, there is no doubt that once we started to understand the science of thermodynamics, it opened the way to many more applications, much beyond the simple heat engines that were done before. So in my opinion, we are more or less in that situation, that we are seeing a technological breakthrough, we are seeing its consequences now, but in some sense I think that we have very little knowledge, very little understanding of what is going on. It is paradoxical if you look at a well-trained neural network. I don't know, the one that Ada was mentioning, that is for the folding of protein, which is really a masterpiece in some sense. We know everything in these. We know the synaptic efficacy of each artificial neuron. There are millions of them. We know all these millions of numbers. We don't really understand what this system is doing. We can see what it is doing. We can see the result. We can see that it is 90% correct, which is very impressive, but we don't understand it. Is it a problem? Well, for the theorist that I am, I think that it is at least a challenge. Is it a problem? I think that it opens a lot of limitations. I mean, when you have this situation, you see limitations even for practical applications. You have, and Jay was saying that, and I think it's a major issue. You don't have explainability. That is, you have a kind of black box, even if you know, again, all the ingredients inside the box, but they are so numerous that you don't understand how it works. So you cannot explain it. You cannot explain it. It means also that you see instabilities. You are prone to adversary attacks. You cannot put a guarantee. You don't really know how to handle situations in which you are putting as input some data that is not at all in the range that you have been seen. So I would advocate the elaboration of Socratic neural networks, which are neural networks which are able to know that they don't know, and to tell you, I don't want to answer these questions because it's not in the range of what I've been trained. You know, it's not. And I think that would be quite interesting, and it's a very interesting challenge. So to me, this is so elaborating a theory is a major challenge. Again, I call it sometimes a dream of the neuroscientist. We have these systems which are doing wonders. We know every single detail inside it, but we don't really understand the emergent property. So this is where really the collective behavior, the collective treatment of information by a very large number of elementary components is a big challenge. And to the statistical physicist that I am, it is of course a very impressive, but also a very stimulating challenge. Then maybe I would like to also to raise one or two things, one or two questions, which I think one has to ask, which is we have to keep in mind that this development of this new technology also asks many ethical questions, in the sense that apart from the very nice applications within science that we have, some of them have been mentioned, and there are many more, it is also true that the main developments in everyday life are around profiling people, profiling customers, recommendation system. So you may like recommendations, but if you look into what it means, you may like it less. The capacity of the machines to have autonomous decision, which again is something that can be very nice, but also absolutely needs to be controlled. And so I think it really asks for strong efforts toward international regulations, the same way that weapons have been regulated and so on. It asks political questions, which are well, if I go back again to this idea of the protein database, of the big breakthrough that was done, it is done by a private company that has put it as an open source software. I think that considering the possible impact that it will have in the next 2 or 3 decades, at some point this should be this is data and algorithms which are of crucial importance, and at some point it should be natural that there is a kind of international government move to having this made really available for sure and for long, which cannot be really guaranteed by a private company. And I think also the last point that I wanted to raise are kind of philosophical questions, because I am, and probably we all are thinking that, or at least let me say, I am thinking that we have not made much step forward towards strong AI. Not at all. I think that these new developments, which again are very impressive technological breakthrough, they are really input to output, but without the consciousness, without the representation of the world, without the main ingredients of what would be steps towards strong intelligence. Still, it is true that if someone had told me 10 years ago or 15 years ago that there will be an algorithm that plays Go better than anybody else, that discovers protein structure, etc. Is it intelligence? I would have thought maybe yes. And I think that gradually we are displacing the notion of what we want to call intelligence, just maybe to protect ourselves. So that will be the philosophical challenge that I will ask to my fellows in the audience.
Thank you. So I'm a philosopher, and I think that from a philosophy point of view, probably the big challenges are ethical challenges, namely how to integrate AI in our society. And this is because AI systems are increasingly challenging our autonomy, privacy, and even our jobs. So the challenge is really how to maintain the balance between the benefits and the dangers of AI. But I'm not an ethicist, so I want to say something about what can we learn from the history of AI that I'm interested in, about the attempts to predict the future of AI. And I think one thing that we can say for sure is that it's extremely hard to predict the future of AI. Turing, for instance, famously predicted in 1950 that around the year 2000, a machine will be able to communicate a conversation like almost like humans. But as we know, I think we will agree that even today, we don't have yet such systems that passed the Turing test. To Turing's credit, I want to say, we can say that Turing, what he did predict in a report that he presented in 1948, he enumerated the methods that he thought will be important in AI. And amazingly, he included them learning procedures and neural networks. But this was quite rare in this time, where the founders of AI mainly used rule-based explicit procedures in devising AI system. And the Institute, the head of the Institute where Turing resided at the time, thought that the report is worthless and childish, so Turing report was never published. So I think that the moral from this story is that while we tend to predict the future of AI by looking at the current methods and technologies we use in AI today, it might well be the case that several decades from today we will use entirely different methods and technologies that we are not familiar with and whose effectivity is beyond our current imagination. Another moral, and this is, I think, related to the last point that the history teaches us, is about the concept of intelligence. At the beginning of AI, people associated intelligence with solving difficult logical, mathematical, and language problems. Playing chess, for example, was considered to be the mark of wisdom. John McCarthy, one of the founders of AI, famously said that chess is the Drosophila of artificial intelligence. But as we know, chess and even Go, I think, is not as important to AI today. As Turing predicted in his 1950 paper, the concept of intelligence went a dramatic change in the last 70 years as a result of scientific studies, theoretical advancements, and technological developments. Today, intelligence is far more associated with learning and adaptive abilities and with very fast cognitive processes. These abilities got relatively little attention. We see the community of AI in the first decades, as the founders of AI were more influenced by the rationalist tradition that emphasized the differences between human and other animals. And today, actually, most of what we call intelligence is we see it as shared by humans and animals. So just in sum, our ability to predict the future of and challenges of AI is, I think, limited by the methods of studies, technologies, and even the concept of intelligence that we maintain today. These methods and concepts confine the predictions to the paradigm from within we act today. And what I think we learn from history is that these methods, technologies, and concepts can themselves change quite dramatically, which makes our ability to predict the future of AI even more challenging.
Thank you, Oren. I'm going to speak for Robert Oman. I must say that these are not his exact words. These are my attempts to transcribe the results of a conversation. So Bob, if I betray you, I apologize. I do my best. So one first challenge that we already see with information technology is the continuous and excessive rate of change and updates driven by technology. We're continuously forced to update and upgrade our devices, not because of our needs, but because the versions have changed. And usually we have no choice. We must take it all without discussion or explanation. A challenge for the development of AI is to avoid this excessive technology-driven pace of top-down change. The changes in the applications of AI in the public domain should be driven by actual needs, not by technology. And this is the first challenge. The second challenge is to enable a discussion between the users and the AI systems. At the moment, it's not possible to discuss with an AI and how to know why and how decisions, for example, are taken. The decision process is opaque, as well as the data they're based on, and this is forced on us. We must develop a language to discuss, maybe argue and negotiate with AIs. This will give the users a say in the interventions of AI in their life, and this is the second challenge.
So Robert said this: broadly speaking, animals can be thought of as possessing two complementary mechanisms. One is related to perception and action. The goal is to create internal models of the world in order to operate in it. The second mechanism, which receives its inputs from the first, is related to reward. The assignment of value to items in the environment and to actions performed on these items to enhance survival or fitness. Value can be based on direct homeostatic needs, such as eating or satisfying hunger, or on more abstract needs, such as acquiring information to satisfy curiosity. In humans, this mechanism also leads to what I might call aesthetic intelligence, appreciation of beauty, creation of symbolic landscapes in art, and in music, the manipulation of abstract sound properties to create tension, resolution, and pleasure. AI systems seem to focus a great deal on the first of these mechanisms. What kind of work has been done or could be done to implement reward-like processes in AI agent? What problems might it solve? What problems might it create?
Thanks. That's a nice one. So I'll speak for myself, and that companies and governments fund AI research because they expect benefits of automation, and scientists are happy to take the funding to better explore what intelligence is. And indeed, we make interesting discoveries and we also create new interesting artifacts. So far, more technology helps science and more science helps technology, but this can create a dangerous confusion on why we are doing this. And that is, in my view, the first great challenge of AI in the coming years. Why do we want to develop AI? Do we really want fully autonomous intelligent agents? For what purpose? We must clarify the purpose of that construction before we continue and put a name on it, because naming has a performative power. We should, as a generic precaution principle, be clear about our goals and make explicit the purpose of the artifacts we are making. Do we want these things to be our tools, our servants, our advisors, our companions, our controllers, or our decision makers? Personally, I would draw the semantic Rubicon somewhere between servant and advisor, but not further. And the purposes should be made explicit for each of these artifacts and their competencies certified. We don't want loose cannons around, or multivac, or whatever. We have already started calling the engineering part of what we do robotics. That's a transdisciplinary engineering field. That field needs to be backed up by a scientific discipline that we could call robotology. By robots here, I mean all these artificial systems that use autonomous information processing to produce decision and action. And as Evan Paris said yesterday, it's very unlikely that there will be human-like robots, but there will be robotics everywhere. The mere existence of robotology as a discipline, that means with its own institutions, with its ethics, etc., will clarify the purpose of research, just as the construction of medicine as a discipline clarified the difference between medicine and biology in terms of purpose. Robotology needs to become a discipline in universities, with its labs, with its research and education programs, and this not just in Japan, but everywhere. And the distinction between in vivo intelligence and in silico intelligence will blur very soon. It has already started. I use here the word intelligence to designate what enables a system to act in a relevant and efficient manner in a given environment. It's already unclear now regarding silicon or organic, whether we talk about, when we talk about neural networks, whether these are artificial or organic structures we're talking about. Robotology will therefore operate beyond these limitations of the nature of the medium, which will be distributed anyway. But robotology must also include the science of relation between robots and their environment. That is about ethics, law, practice, and experience. And that is the second challenge of AI and robotics in the next 20 years, I think. We must build at international level the regulation bodies that will regulate the construction and exploration of these automatons. We must build the robot regulation international organization, like R2IO or something like that, whose work will be to coordinate the efforts of regulation in the domain, feeding on the basis of robotology the laws, the certification and normalization procedures that will soon become indispensable for the use of robots. Of course, this R2EO, or whatever its name, would ground its work in the findings of robotology. So in sum, two concrete challenges: to construct robotology as a scientific and academic discipline, and to create an organization to regulate at international level the production, evolution, certification, commerce, ownership, and use of these artifacts. That is not new. We've been doing this for every emerging domain of interest for the human, and it works, and so let's just do it again. And I think,
So this is from Shimon Yulam, who is a cognitive scientist and machine vision expert. With the amazing rate of advances in AI, anticipating correctly what will happen on a timescale of decades is an impossible task and potentially embarrassing in retrospect. As I see it, a major general challenge and an open question is, will current AI methods reach or approach some form of true, quote-unquote, human-like understanding? This problem is common to different areas of AI. In my own field of vision, there has been impressive progress in a range of visual tasks, including object recognition, segmentation, image capturing, and others. But we still struggle with the question, do AI vision systems really understand the scene they are looking at? A preliminary challenge in tackling the problem of achieving human-like understanding is developing methods for evaluating the degree of understanding obtained by AI systems. Understanding, quote unquote, is not a case of all known, but a matter of degree, and perhaps of different types of understanding. In any domain, understanding can range from a lack of understanding to understanding some of the principles to a deep and detailed understanding. In the case of vision, directions I consider relevant for evaluating understanding, including the ability to obtain meaningful scene structures, to reach broad semantic generalization, and to justify conclusions. However, creating useful systematic methods for evaluating understanding along such directions is a complex open challenge. As suspected as evaluation methods develop, experience will show that current AI methods do not give rise to, by themselves, to the emergence of human-like understanding. We will then face a fundamental challenge of identifying the missing ingredients and of finding methods that lead to deeper, more human-like understanding. The process will be gradual, and I think it is possible that reaching deep and detailed human-like understanding will prove to be a challenge for decades.
Robot has already history of 50 years so far, okay? So since then, robot has been used, employed in many sectors of the world, particularly starting with such an industrial kind of robot. So that we can expand such a kind of space, time, in a way, with a robot. That's a kind of we have done so far. And then robot is now kind of expanding such a kind of application area from the industrial kind of manufacturing to the service industry. Service industry means that you can say such a kind of medical areas, like kind of a robot. A medical doctor uses such a medical robot so that you can have a less such a pain or such a kind of more like a minimum invasive surgery, for example. Also like kind of other application, such a kind of healthcare problem. So robot can help kind of assistance to make the people easier to take care of the people. So that's also interesting here. For the next 20 years, though we are people expecting such a kind of robot, those in terms of such a kind of aging society. That's a kind of so also like there are many other robots, like agricultural robot. That's a kind of field robotics. Field robotics has many kind of applications, agriculture-wise, construction-wise, or kind of even outer space. That's a kind of field robotics in the future, the next 20 years or 30 years. So we are facing such a kind of a problem today, as like in my presentation the day before yesterday, we are tackling such a kind of mega trend problem. Mega trend problem includes such a kind of aging society, climate, global warming, and also kind of food, energy, all the things. So today we can make use of such a kind of robotics and automation system with the AI that we can try to solve such a kind of problem. And that, for example, environment problem, the robot, there are so many robotic, disciplinary robotics. So the maybe 1,000, 1 million robot to monitor those kind of situation in the world, okay? That's a kind of good thing to think. Also, a robot also can be used to in such a kind of field robotics to make a rescue people in the hazard wise, for example, like kind of typhoon or kind of a hurricane or any other kind of situation, people cannot go there. Then we can send a robot to do so, or we can manipulate interoperation-wise to do so. That's a kind of good application in the future challenge in next 20 years. That's a kind of good thing also. We are aiming at such a robot go into the home, okay? Your home. Maybe you can have such a robot like a kind of novels. So today robot is already somewhere, some kind of specific domains, like a cleaning or something like that, or even some domain cooking for the business type of things. So, but those will be more to the individual life, or family-wide. So that's kind of going to be robot going to be such a kind of a good kind of companion with you to make your life more enjoyable. Also, like a robot will grow with you as you grow, something like that. That's AI robot. That's what we need. If the human always grow, robot doesn't grow in no co-evolution, people forget the robot. But that's a robot how to grow together, evolve with human growth, something like that. So that's a kind of challenging thing here, and that's a robot we are aiming at. That's a kind of, so I conclude such a way, robot will have a good, such a kind of embodiment with a human. Thank you. With a good intelligence.
Well, maybe I'll make a point that I discussed during my lecture here. In my mind, in spite of amazing advances in AI systems, there's no internal mental life in the current machine intelligent systems. As mentioned earlier, if the systems are very good at solving problems that are basically input-out mapping, in absence of any input, not only there's no output, but also there's nothing really in between internally, right, in the system. So I'd like to challenge our field, our own field, to think about what does it mean to have smart machines that have internal life. Okay, so what are the basic internal processes that will be really we can think about and be built into such systems. Give an example of understanding. What does it mean to understand, right? Usually you understand by reasoning. That's an internal process, right? That's not really enslaved to the external stimuli. And also you actively look for data or even search for new data proactively, right, based on your reasoning. That's also internally driven, not enslaved by the external environment. And then you can explain the general principle, right? That's coming from inside again. So my test for smart machines is what kind of internal life, including things like reasoning, planning, and thinking, can be realized. And just to add that for that challenge, I think it's very fruitful to have more exchanges between AI system field and neuroscience. So neuroscience actually has expanded tremendously over the last few decades, looking at brain structures that underlie abstraction, planning, reasoning.
So even if yesterday I had the opportunity to show some of the most futuristic or fantasist robots coming from the past and project into the future, I'm very bad in futurology. And as Professor Arun Chagri just said now about Professor John McCarthy, chess game was at the center of artificial intelligence in the 50s, and as Mr. Meza said before, the cursor of what is artificial intelligence just changed over the time. And at least before the COVID, the 10 professions most wanted over the world didn't exist in 2007 when this was invented. Now, after the COVID, the profession most research or more truck driver and so on. But what I want to say about this experience of with the fellow and the other mentor last week and our visit yesterday, during this week I've heard many times the same word: learning, learning machine, how system learn, how to learn. And as I say before, I'm very bad at futurology, but one thing I'm sure, and Professor Fukuda will have concern about this too, because it's coming from a more older society than our society, and but in 50 years I will be 90 years old. And my concern about learning is mostly to have engineers in the future and doctors in the future for 2 reasons. We will have to maintain old people and we will have to maintain complex equipment. So this challenge and this discussion is just about that, a society in which we don't know yet what will be the meaning of artificial intelligence, but at least artificial intelligence today have the challenge to anticipate a very complex society with a lot of complex device and with a lot of old people that will have to maintain in good condition.
Thank you very much, Devin. Now we open the floor for comments and questions. So do we have a mic that can go around? How does it work?
We just have the 2 and 1 doesn't work.
Okay. All right. So who has comments or questions?
Thank you. I'm Daniel Andler. So I've been looking at AI since the early 70s, and I have a terrible impression of déjà vu. And just so I want to expand to say, for example, what you two were saying about the fact that the line of what is intelligence is moving. It's called Tesla's theorem, and Tesla's theorem goes back to 1970 or so. Already we had the same problematic. But so let me, I won't give you my theory of AI and natural intelligence because I'm finishing a book on that, so you'll have to read it, although it's in French. But let me ask you how you would react to the following extremely simple idea, that there are 2 kinds, AI, it can be understood in 2 basic ways. Lato sensu, in the broad sense, that's the public discourse. They're all saying, you know, AI, AI, AI. And as my friend Gérard Berry says, there's very little AI in the narrow sense in it. It's essentially computer science or informatique, advanced informatique. And that's going to go to the sky. I have very little doubt personally that it's going to make tremendous progress, AlphaFold, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be even better in 30 years. I'm not sure it's such a good idea to maintain 90-year-olds in good shape. I mean, we may have other priorities, you know, climate change, immigration, and so on. So maybe it's okay to let us die at 80 and not keep us going on complicated machines until we're 100 years old. But so AI, in a wide sense, has a tremendous future. Agreed, and it's really extraordinary, and everything that you gentlemen have been saying, gentlemen only, by the way, is right on spot. But the AI in a narrow sense, which is something like an attempt to reproduce an even better human intelligence, has made no progress, essentially. Has made no progress. It's the same old story. So not that it's uninteresting and not that I want to discourage people from, working on it, it's but it's not made much progress. So what do you think about making that clear distinction between AI in the broad sense and AI in the sort of narrow sense, which is essentially stagnating?
Who wants to respond to this? Yes, Jay.
Danielle, it's a pleasure to see you again. Let me say three things quickly. One is there are many women, but they're not on the stage. And in particular, some of the really amazing young leaders who may or may not have been even invited, but may have been invited and couldn't accept, are women. So several amazing leaders in the field of artificial intelligence of the female gender. But I grabbed the microphone so I could respond to XJ, really, because I think that, but it's partly a response to you, so it's not completely disingenuous here. And it has to do with this question about the progress on the question of representation and, reflection on the outside world and encoding the world in ways that are not strictly stimulus-driven and so on. And, I would say that there is a contribution to this question that was introduced in a paper called the Differentiable Neural Computer. That I think, to me, this was really an important sort of, and I'm a kind of a continualist, but to me, this was a bit of a small quantum jump. In this system, they haven't a memory like the memory in a computer. Like that's why it's called the neural computer. It's got a set of slots that you can write things into the way a computer is. It's called differentiable because you can train it using gradient descent. And you can train it not only to use what's been stored in its memory, but also to figure out how to transform the inputs that it receives so as to represent them in ways that will be useful for future problem solving. And that was the thing to me that was really, truly a breakthrough, in that this system, given sort of specifications of future goals against a game board that it's supposed to try to achieve these goals with. So if you can imagine a set of tiles with numbers on them that are displayed to you in a little grid, the future goals are specified in terms of constraints on what that board should look like after you manipulate it, okay? So placing tiles on top of each other so the one's on top of a 6, even though it's below the 6 now when you're looking at it in the grid, okay? So the point is that what the computer stores in its memory is not the literal instruction, but what operation will I want to do if I'm going to execute that instruction later? And this, to me, that was the really interesting step forward that this model exhibited, and that made me begin to think that we really were able to see useful non-literal representations could be acquired as a result of a learning process, which people have so strongly emphasized. So this isn't anything like a prediction of the future. I totally agree with those who think that the only thing that they can't predict is the future. But I will say that the nature of what has been achieved is somewhat more interesting in regard to these cognitive questions than I think either of you gentlemen were giving it credit for.
Thank you very much, Jay. Who wants to do I see more questions in the, or yes, Beatrice. I think our fellows are completely asleep. What did you eat at lunch?
Just a very quick question connecting two comments that we had a second ago. The comment you made about the inner life, the current absence of an inner life, and what Jay just said about goals. To what extent are those, if there is already some kind of presence of goal setting, that's not so far away from having an inner life in my neutral understanding of things.
I was hoping somebody else was, I like the comment, and I think this, maybe it is worth us discussing and elaborating. I wanted to hear somebody else respond to that point about goals, because I think it really is incredibly important. When I think about, but it's also an incredible, you know, it relates to what Sadi and others have raised as concern, right? So if we created artificial systems that recognized important unsolved problems and set goals for themselves to solve them, you know, like Newton or Einstein or Darwin did, then, you know, that would be interesting, right? And now that would be where we would finally be, we would have reached the singularity at that point, right? There's a movie called Ex Machina that sort of, you know, forces you to think about this, because there's this humanoid robot who's created in this movie, and of course it is science fiction because this is actually a human actress who's performing in this role and being as human-like as only a human can be at this point. But what happens is that she does have sufficient autonomy and purpose setting to realize that you know, what she wants to do is like get the hell out of there and escape from the masters who created her, because they are only wanting to use them for their purposes. And so this is a really interesting, I think, you know, part of the problem that we face. So in order to create something that's truly intelligent and human-like, it would have the ability to identify its problems for itself and set those goals. But once it's got that, you know, are we going to limit the set of problems that it's allowed to set for itself, or not? So that's where that regulation issue comes in that Sadi was talking about. So I'm going to shut up from here on out, because I think I've exhausted anything I have to say.
Laura. 1, 2, 3. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for the comments and the suggestions. So I would like to come back to what Professor Chagrir said about that now the intelligence that we are interested in is not the rationalist one, but is something that is more shared among humans and animals. And then also Zatorre started to speak about aesthetic intelligence. And also Professor Mezar spoke about a kind of Socratic intelligence, right? So the capacity to doubt ourselves, etc. So I would like to hear from all of you, where do you think that we can implement these forms of intelligence in an AI systems? How could we do it? What are the paths that we need to pursue specifically, also in terms of the technology that are required to do so, and also in terms of the machine learning and new conceptual frameworks that we need in order to really have these forms of intelligence implemented in AI system? I know that is very broad, but maybe this is the place for discuss also such a broad question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, I just meant that you know, at the beginning of AI, of course, so people were more in the rationalist tradition with, you know, rule-based, that, you know, what was considered more intelligent are things that has to do with logical reasoning, maybe mathematical reasoning, and also behind it is the idea that this is one of the distinctive features of humans that animals don't have. And just what I meant to say that, you know, a few decades later, especially with the neural network tradition, it's more in the empiricist tradition, and that and within this tradition, the divide between humans and animals is not as clear-cut as it is in the rationalist tradition. Now I will let the expert talk about how to implement those.
I am not the expert that you are saying, but I think it's a very interesting issue. One area which is not mine, so which I will try to take an example from, which is language analysis, has made tremendous progress, and we see it in terms of automatic translation, which really has made significant progress. It has made significant progress by putting in the trash decades and decades of clever work, and by substituting it by pure correlations, long texts, which are put as an input, and trying to have an input-output mapping, you know. By giving up all the idea of analysis of the grammar, etc., etc. So it is very impressive. In some sense, one may also find it a bit sad, but at the same time, and I agree with what Daniel was saying. I was saying it also. I think we have not made a single step in the direction of strong AI, not at all. And but maybe, if one is optimistic, maybe one will reach a point in which it will be possible to merge the two approaches. That is, to mix these systems that I said we have them, we know how they do an input-output, we can see the input, we can see the output, we measure the performance, 90%, perfect, wonderful. We don't really understand how they do, and at some point, putting back all the accumulated knowledge of what is a grammar and so on, and trying to mix the two. I don't know how to do that, but I mean, you are here for picking these challenges. So.
Thank you, Mark. But I think this has already started a bit in you know, automatic text analysis. You know, like I think that DeepL, for example, is actually including a little bit of more than just stats, right? So yeah, Jay. Was there something short? Yeah, because then now we have 3 questions waiting.
Yeah, I was struck all of a sudden by the absence of people who are, you know, like any of the authors of that paper that I just mentioned, Alex Graves and Greg Wayne, for example, or the people in deep reinforcement learning who are thinking really hard about this reinforcement learning question and beginning to answer it in ways that I think are very exciting and important. And, you know, I am, well, you chose us, you know, 70-year-olds, basically. Maybe that's not the average age, but I don't know. Some of us are well into our 70s. And you kind of missed the boat there, right? I mean, there's a generation of deep learning researchers who are a little bit between the fellows and us, who are the people who know some of the answers to some of the really interesting questions that are coming from the audience. And so I just want to like point to the fact that the amount of expertise that we have here on the questions that are being asked is quite limited. And there is a layer of people out there who have that, are really at the cutting edge of this. So I would mention Dan Yammans, junior colleague of mine at Stanford, Chelsea Finn, that's one of those young women in the field, and Greg Wayne and Alex Graves, as you know, amazing examples of people who are working in that layer, and that should be part of these kinds of conversations. So.
Okay, well, first, thank you, Jay, for agreeing to recruit for Brazil some of these people which you mentioned from that level. We didn't succeed, but I trust that with your help we will be able to succeed. Okay. Now, concerning the issue, I'm already pretty much impressed by intelligence, I must say. I marvel on how much the human mind succeeded to work. And one of our ways to produce intelligence is to reproduce, because it seems like the younger generation are taking us each time to a higher level. So and our title is Intelligence and Artificial Intelligence. I would like to ask you a question where I look at artificial intelligence as a threat. Okay, that's what more concerns me in this question. We know that evolution has various stages, and we know that we are here and not for such a long time. So what I think one can try to quantitatively estimate is under what conditions, if at all, maybe the answer is never, could it be that we are creating something which will eventually substitute us as what dominates this planet? So I'm asking you, can you think of quantitative tests which don't have to say what happens in 20 years, you don't know how long it will take to reach that, but under what conditions, with what assumptions, for example, how many robots would be needed to get rid of us? Okay, that's one example. Maybe you have better ideas on what could eventually lead to the fact that we are giving actually a role of the people who will succeed us here. So my question is, a precise question is, can you think of quantitative tests on what is the potential that we are building something which will move us and make us redundant? In their opinion, at least, and we'll have the force to do. And Jay mentioned movies, so of course my movie is Terminator 1, 2, till infinity.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know about sufficient condition, but I guess I can mention two things as kind of necessary conditions. One would be, again, it's not just input-output, device, but it's some machine system that has the reasoning ability from the internal, knowledge and insights. And the second one is motivation, right? The machines would have endowed with some motivation, and I guess that without that, I don't feel any threat by the machines. Thank you.
Perhaps looking at how much we invest in different types of technologies compared to what we invest in human welfare would be just an interesting trend to monitor. Doesn't really answer your question, but that's something interesting to look at. Jakub?
Yes, thank you. I would like to pick up on two threads. One thread that was already mentioned here was that goal setting is an issue. And to me, this is really suboptimal, because to any optimizing algorithm, changing your goal is suboptimal because it contradicts your goal that you already have. So in this regard, I would like to ask if you have an idea what sort of goals should we intend to implement in these algorithms, especially given the threat of the future that was already mentioned before. As intelligence progresses in these AI systems, you will have basically a risk of intelligence explosion, and maybe you've heard of the scenario of apocalypse by paperclips, of a paperclip maximizer. So the threat is not really that the machines will hate us, it's just the machines will see us as a bunch of atoms which they can use for something else. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
You're making these artifacts, so
it's a kind of a very, very interesting goal setting. Well, I have no idea, because everyone depends on the kind of person who are going to you are kind of implement your ideas. So the goal setting depends on individual anyway. It's your life. It's like I cannot tell you this is your goal. Or this is your goal. I cannot say that. That's a so once it's your we never set a kind of set up such a clear goal. Instead, we are going to be something to do so. So that's our life. And if you say that's a goal setting, maybe we can say something like kind of a clear goal, like a kind of robot, what to do. So that's we can say that. But I cannot tell you, human, what you should do that. I can tell the robot, this one, please complete this task to do so. Clean the room, okay, do that, something like that, to do so. That's a kind of a clear goal setting, such a kind of so, sorry, I have no idea for such an intelligence goal setting.
Yes, Max?
We have Max, then Henry, then the ladies.
So my original question was about the ethics, the danger of input-output kind of AR. So, and so you answered that AI input-output shouldn't have a danger. My next question would be about the understanding of artificial intelligence, right? We need to develop a language. The artificial intelligence need to have the capacity for metacognition, right? To answer when its domain doesn't apply or something like this. And I'm wondering if it's just a matter of building a more complex series of neural network, or is something like really different, like strong AI that we are talking about. So is it just complexity, or is it something that we haven't put exactly our finger on? Like is it consciousness or emotion or motivation? So to understand and speak with the machine, what do we need?
I think what I want to do is to reinforce that question and get a couple of other people to speak to it, because I was very struck by the quote from Shimon Ullman in this respect, right? He talked about that human-like, he used that phrase over and over again, human-like understanding. And my own understanding of human-like understanding is that human-like understanding is intrinsically fallible, subject to illusion, and incomplete and imperfect. At least he acknowledged that understanding was a matter of degree, and I thought that was useful. But I wished he was here to go out to dinner and have a conversation with him about that question, because I myself find that there's all these sort of weird matters of degree when I think about my own understanding of something. And for example, I think it's fair to say that I understand the Pythagorean theorem. I could actually sit down and prove it to you in 3 different ways, but I'm still always sort of like, well, do I really understand this? So the only measure that I ultimately have is sort of the Turing test on myself, right? And yet somebody might come up with a way of probing my understanding of the Pythagorean theorem that would reveal that there's an aspect of this particular theorem that I still don't really understand. And so what I think we are ultimately faced with when we consult ourselves to ask, whether we understand, is exactly the same situation that we face when we ask our AIs if they understand, or our colleagues if they understand, or it's like what it means to be a scientist about this is to realize that you have to ask questions and probe and find out what kinds of answers you get from different probes in order to be able to evaluate whether the system has certain capabilities or not. Turing, pointed us to that with his famous test, but he didn't give us any of the details on how to actually administer it. And what a lot of research in AI is about is sort of like realizing that people formulate these sort of challenges for the specific challenges for the systems, and then people teach those challenges. And anytime you've got a specific previously defined challenge, you can build to it and solve it, and that's why chess is no longer the Drosophila of artificial intelligence, right? They did that one now. So I just think that understanding is itself intrinsically a moving target with respect to the question you ask about it, and that I'd love to hear whether Shimon had a response to that. That's maybe somebody else does.
Maybe I add one little thing. I think this is a fascinating question. I want to degrade it a bit, and I mean one way to try to answer is to insist on explanation, being able to explain. But this, I think, is an interesting goal, and it's maybe one that can be reached, and it's really a kind of practical one. I mean, it's more concrete than really understanding, explaining. Explaining means, but then I want also to, at the same time, I want to mention that explaining means explaining to a human. We have limited capacity. Our typical understanding goes through the use of relatively simple rules, or simple rules that we combine in a combinatoric sense. So it enables us to do some very sophisticated mathematics. But in some sense, everything that we understand, or we think we understand, can be summarized with relatively small modules. This is related to our memory, to the memory capacity. I mean, we say c square equal a square plus b square, because that's something that we can say in our lifetime. It means we can do it fast on our scale. But it might be that it might be that the prediction of a protein structure, it has to go through something which is complicated, which involves many variables. In the end, it is finding the accumulation of correlations of different orders between many variables. So it might be that there is no single two-line description that. So I wanted to pose the challenge of explainability, which I think is a good one, and we need it if we want to use AI for practical use, because every user, as soon as it comes into practice for important application, you need to be able to explain your choice. But at the same time, we have to understand that it is also a strong limitation, that going from a device that is able to make a good prediction to one that is able to summarize it in a compact rule that can be explained to a human being in less than an hour, because then our attention goes down and so on and so forth. Okay, you will tell me in mathematics, maybe we can be trained in a... Okay, add a few years, and but still, it is still relatively compact. So, well, that is another challenge.
Thank you. This is for Toshio-san. I really like the idea of robots working as carers for an aging population. I wondered about, there's kind of a practical aspect to that, which is like, how would a robot help an elderly person who's fallen over? But there's kind of an emotional aspect as well, where if you want an aging population to accept robots into their homes, it might help if they could develop a personal relationship with the robot, if the robot had a personality and high levels of emotional intelligence, in the way that many people have very close relationships with their guide dogs, for example. And that might help with another sort of aspect of an aging population, which is loneliness. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on those kinds of emotional personality kind of challenges in caring robots.
Thank you very much for questioning such a kind of very challenging areas, robot to such a care people and something like that. Such a very there are many kind of research going on, also kind of practical application going on in terms of such a kind of helping people level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. So far, there's a kind of people take care is such a level 1, level 2. It's rather easy to do so, but the population-wise more. So there's a kind of thing. So people, their robot to just help kind of some kind of aged person to take care, to take a kind of take a walk, go outside, okay, or make the exercise, something like that, indoor, outdoors. That's a kind of there are some kind of assistant those things, okay. Also there are some kind of robot take care of those kind of aged people to take care, to have a kind of a sort of a, not a conversation exactly. That's a kind of feel them. That's a kind of enjoyable. That it looks like just a simple reaction. However, that kind of such a kind of aged people, like say the kind of Attenheim, that they are using such a kind of robot. For example, in Denmark, they are introduce our kind of take care robot. So unit is 1,000 unit to the kind of care house. So that's a senior kind of citizen was maybe she or he might have such a dementia or something like that. But that's a kind of take care work. Usually, those people refuse such a human. Those things. However, they are very kind of enjoying interact with such a kind of a robot called Palo, which it's already there. That's a kind of thing. So that's a level 1 still there. Okay, level 2 then maybe go to kind of take. Helping, assisting such a kind of eating, kind of such a kind of thing, or some others. That's a kind of and usually I always mention such a kind of ethical and things to do so, because it includes such a private matters. Like a toilet wise, kind of taking a bus like that, bus room, something like something like that. That's very important to do so, and we can develop such a technology in 20 years or 30 years. That's a kind of a good thing using such a kind of good actuation system, wherever it is. But still, we need such a kind of a good understanding from the people, and must be accepted by society. To put many robots, every home, such a kind of power or other such a kind of robot system with more actuation. That's a kind of interesting. So anyway, that's a kind of also it must have a good principle for robot principle. Okay, 3 principles for robot. Never hurt the people. Something like that. Okay, that's a kind of important to do so. And it is your kind of society acceptance, how we can go ahead.
I see we have Marco, Daniel, Jim, Eliezer, and Melvin. So try to be concise, please.
Thank you. It's interesting that we frequently speak about intelligence as the property of the individual mind. Oh, okay. My name is Margot Beniglipson. I'm a fellow this year at the EOA. it seems that we think frequently of intelligence as the property of the individual mind, but it's also recognized that intelligence among humans and in socio-technical systems is distributed. It's social, it's environmentally contextualized, and I think importantly, it's institutionally stabilized. And a few of you have brought up the issue of institutions and how they need to adapt to meet the artificial intelligence age. We see democracy, justice, those democratic institutions kind of under threat or transformed in this moment. What do you think, if we think about intelligence in this way that includes the institutional capacities of humans and machines together, what do you think, how do you think institutions need to adapt? And what opportunities does AI offer at that collective level for organization of human societies?
If I may say something about this, it's a matter of procedural development justice in a way. If we want institutions, which are us basically, to inform what is the future of robots, we have to involve them in the design, right? This is why I was advocating for having organizations that take care of this. We cannot just leave that to technologists and scientists. This is the problem of how we change our world through artifacts, right? And so the answer is not in technology, the answer is in politics, right? And it's in law and it's in regulation. And if we don't have bodies of regulation, this negotiation between the various participants of our world, may they be artifacts or animals or humans or environment, will not happen. So we have to design that. This is not a problem for, I mean, the technologists or the scientists. This is a problem for the politicians, and they have to step in.
I can give an example just to reinforce the presentation of Professor Fukuda, and I know that it's a very delicate subject to speak about, again, old people in France. But 10 years ago, as a concern, the research in Japan have got 5 orientation, which was the goal for robotics. One of those orientation was dementia. The second one was mobility. The third one was isolation and communication. The fourth one was to help the people who help the people which need help, okay? And the fifth one was the gestion of the excrement, okay? Just.
Well, the conversation has drifted away from understanding, but I just wanted to submit to Marc and Jay whether it seems to me there's two kinds of notions of understanding in this issue of do AI systems or robots understand. One is, do they have a full and adequate knowledge of what's at stake, say the Pythagorean theorem, and then I completely agree with Jay, it's a sort of a continuous, maybe we don't really understand. For example, in mathematics, it's clear that a minuscule mathematician like what I was in my early days, although in some sense I understood, say, the theorem that I proved in my thesis, compared to, you know, much better mathematicians, I didn't really understand. I didn't get the deep structure. So I completely agree. But the other sense of understanding is being acquainted with, knowing what it's about, rather than having a complete, full, faithful representation, knowing what it's about. And what, you know, my friend, the roboticist Jean-Paul Lomo, always emphasizes the fact that when you say the robot finally managed to put the ball in the basket, he says, it's not the case, because the robot has absolutely no idea that he's dealing with balls and baskets. And in that sense, he's not acquainted. He may have an adequate description, but he's not acquainted with balls and baskets. And of course, someone like Dennett would deny the distinction that I want to make. He would say there's nothing over and above the description.
My real motion is just to, I'm Jim Holland from UCSD, and my real motivation is just to take off my mask. You know, when, I guess one of the things I'm interested in is more the intelligence augmentation than AI. And I think today we think more with computers than we ever have in the past. And I'm a little bit concerned about that in one way. When Jay arrived at UCSD, we were both very fortunate to have Jeff Hinton as a postdoc in those days. And much to Jeff's credit, and maybe I'm not doing him justice here, but he's been working on the same ideas since those early days. And I don't think it's completely false that the really breakthrough was change in computing power that allowed a lot of the advances in deep learning and the things going on. So I guess my question really is that I feel like we're on this bus, and I think one of the questions you guys are asking is where we should be going, where should we be directing the bus at? And I guess my question is who's driving? And my concern is the following. I mean, if the sort of the metaphor of, our bodies sort of evolved during a time when fats and sugars were rare, and our body seeks them out, and now we have epidemics of diabetes and all kinds of things from that. And I guess a little bit of my concern is that how can we be concerned with sort of our cognitive health in the same sense, where we're sort of now, things are being driven by advertising and that, and as you go home tonight, if you're on a bus or something, everyone's looking at a screen and that, and I guess the concern really is that we might not be thinking enough about the implications for our own cognition and stuff, where now we're in a thing where, we're humans and we like interesting things, and these algorithms can bring them to us 24 hours a day, all day long and stuff, and they're maybe not always the things that are healthy for us. And how do we use that same technology to direct us towards deep thought and long-term kinds of things, and the kind of things that everyone in this room has spent a lot of their life at. But I feel like just like McDonald's and the unhealthy food and things are pulling us in those directions, I think all of this being driven by all of this kind of advertising and that for all of this technology, that it might well be pulling us in very unhealthy ways. And I guess I agree with Sadi that other folks need to step in here, and it can't be the job for all the scientists to make those decisions, but I think they're really ethical concerns that we all should be concerned about. So I got to take off my mask, so.
We're like the rats pressing the pedal and, yeah.
Okay, this is a little bit a follow-up question to what Henry asked and what Toshio-san referred to. And the way Henry presented it, he said he's concerned about care for the elders and it's a problem, maybe it can help. So I would like to ask about the responsibility of a scientist to get involved in a mission whose goals, which you classify level 1, level 2, level 3, you have goals which have impact on the way we live in society. So, for example, design a robot which will tell a person he's fired. Okay? It's maybe much more comfortable for the corporation which asked for this. It's much more comfortable. The next level is design the robot which tells the patient, I'm very sorry, this is your diagnosis, with this probability you will die in 10 days, with that probability you will die in 21 days, etc., etc. And also delegating the care of the elders, not to the family, but delegating them to robots, which will have a long-term impact on our society. Some things are very comfortable, but there will be a certain disconnection which this is going to drive us to. So the question is, what responsibility should have the engineer or the scientist when he's given a goal to design a robot, which he can design, okay? It's not long-term future, it's immediate future you can design, which has goals of this nature, which have a deep impact on how our society functions.
Yes, and thank you very much for your nice question. Such a kind of engineers in the society, how we can do that. So look at the kind of back to the 50 years, the robotics. The situation, the robot requirement is changed as time goes on. So being, for example, robot should be within kind of a really restricted, because it must be always watched here. Also kind of motors, power, when you use in your daily life, must be less than 80 watt. Must be less than 80 watt. So that the means that kind of everyone don't hurt the people. Okay? But the technology goes on. So society accepted, okay? People can rule such a regulation is abolished. Okay, it's a kind of the technology and the society. They like more kind of a good kind of application, good kind of wide variety of using such a robot. So that's why the society said, okay, we don't need such a kind of regulation, 80 watt, okay? Just go ahead, go overhead, okay? So that's a good, then we can use more in your daily life. That means engineer and the society, in a way, in a sense, sounds like good communication. We need a good communication. So the society needs more this kind of function more. Well, then they abolish such a kind of limitation, right? Something like that. Then engineer can use more, better power motors to better kind of performance. In such a way, I don't know in the next 20 years, 30 years, what you want to do. Maybe you can ask us, okay, or society, we can abolish such a kind of, remove such a limitation, something like that. For example, today, such a kind of mobile kind of, such a kind of robot within your house, less than 6 kilometers per hour. Okay? Because if you go fast, but it's dangerous. But some people say, "Ooh, I just a little bit more faster." Like that. Then your society say, "Oh, abolish regulation more, not 6 kilometers per hour, maybe 10 kilometers per hour, something like that." So in such a way, those requirements comes always from your kind of users, such a kind of wish, or sort of a kind of what you expect to do. So that's a kind of we can do that. Of course, we can engineer or scientists make a kind of good prototype. Okay, without such a kind of limitation. Hey, look at that. That's a kind of, you in the future, 20 years, you can have such a kind of fantastic such a robot like that. But maybe it needs such a kind of agreement with your society, such a kind of requirement. That's a kind of, so that we, robot engineer, must talk, negotiate, or kind of communicate more with society. That's a kind of thing. The regulation will all come from US.
I think yesterday Toshio-san said many people come to him to ask to make war robots that can kill, etc. And he says no, because he's got a moral spine, right? History shows us that this is not the case of everyone, right? So this is why we need regulation, just like in every other domain. We just cannot trust scientists. We know that. We are scientists. We can't be trusted. We go to do what's fun, what we can do, we do it. So we need some limitation. This has, as you just said, to be negotiated with the society. You can't trust truffle pigs like this.
The 5 examples of the priority of the Japanese government are really a choice of society. In our society, we have houses for retired people. In France, there are 1 million in retired house. And in Japan, the project, as inhuman as you suppose that it is, it's the contrary. They want to keep the people in their own house. So the robotic project is not a universal robot. It's just a specific use for specific demand. And it's personalized. It's personalized for diabetic people, for mobility, for loss of memory, all what we have already in your cell phone. So it's nothing more than that, a project of society and a relation specifically about the elders, which is quite a problem in our Occidental societies, please.
Hi, I'm Melvin Wevers from the University of Amsterdam. I want to push the envelope a bit and be a bit more speculative. So we're talking about 20 years in the future. I was thinking about the novel Dune, where there's this Butlerian jihad where computers are sort of eradicated and people have to deal with a world without computers. And we're sort of discussing now as if there's a future where AI is sort of, that's the future, that's the only path we can walk on. But are we not making ourselves as scientists too vulnerable by being so dependent on AI? And should we not be thinking about a future where maybe other ways of being that does not include AI? So I was curious about your thoughts. What do you think is the responsibility of the scientists, of the computer scientists, to also consider these things? So I'm not really talking about regulation necessarily, but more the sort of, I don't know, call it creativity in 200 years. Are we not being too restricted, also driven by monetary concerns?
Well, since we're in the realm of speculation, I just want to say that I hope that the fellows walk out of the room feeling that you don't know what the field is moving into. Because in the end, science depends on creativity of individuals, right? So we really, you should feel free to explore just driven by curiosity. I don't know if this is relevant at all, but I had the opportunity this time in Paris to see the original book, The Man by René Descartes. I was very moved. Never expected that book is this thick, you know, with all the details about, you know, what he could find out about physics, about you know, the brain. It's just, it's not relevant, but it's just an example in my mind that how, you know, somehow, right, an individual could just have this insights, this curiosity, and this, of course, you know, mental power to do something totally different, totally new. So we really cannot predict the future with or without machines. It all depends on our creativities. I just want to say one more thing about we cannot trust scientists. I kind of more in line with what Toshio-san said. We work together with society, right? So the scientists also, of course, are very aware of those moral dilemmas and issues. You know, we're not really on two different sides, right? We will work together. Of course, that's what you meant. But yeah, thank you.
We only have 2 left, so if you want, we can take Alex and then Lauren.
We'll be able to discuss informally, which is one of the objectives of this place.
Alex Kaiko-Geitsch from the group of neurotheory at ONS. Okay. So I want to challenge the notion of intelligence. So yesterday we saw a talk from Jim who talked about the idea that what is considered intelligent may not be objective, but rather enculturated. And many of you talked about the fact that the goalposts for intelligence keep seeming to change from, you know, role-based behavior, symbolic AI, to learning patterns, to then learning to learn, et cetera. And I want to add that many historical attempts to define and quantify intelligence were driven more by politics rather than by science. And here I'm thinking of the ideology behind eugenics in the US, UK, literacy tests, phrenology, very rich history of this. Regarding artificial intelligence, John McCarthy, who coined the term, actually said in a 1973 BBC televised Light Hole debate, so that's the debate that comes from the report that actually gave way to one of the AI winters in the UK. He said that he used the term AI for political funding reasons. And so I'm worried that, I can send the link with the on YouTube. I'm worried that our definition of intelligence is just like what we can do that algorithms cannot, and that this is missing maybe other forms of interesting cognitive behavior, both in humans, maybe from other cultures, non-Western, non-industrialized cultures, also in other animals, and also maybe in like collective animal behavior. And so I instead want to put forward the possibility that instead of like abstract notion of intelligence writ large, with intelligence with a capital I, there's just behavior in certain tasks, and some of those tasks are solved in ways that we will consider maybe for cultural reasons more or less intelligent. And so I want to know if you agree with this view, and if you do not, can you please give me a definition of intelligence?
Yeah, surely I don't have a definition of intelligence, but I think in philosophy, I mean, it's in many of the debates, I think it's a mistake to think that we have that we start with a definition of intelligence, or that the debate is about the definition of intelligence. I think we have a certain vague concept or notion that we try to sharpen with the scientific research. Maybe we will find out that there is, some natural kind, or maybe we will discover that, as you said, what we call intelligence is really, many, many different small tasks. I think this is Dennett's, in some ways, view. Or we'll decide that we should abandon this concept. Yeah, so it's fine. But I mean, but I'm just not sure why at this point we have to require a definition of intelligence. I don't think that we are there yet.
I'm reminded of Wittgenstein, who told us that we can't ever find a definition of a concept like a game, and I think it applies to intelligence, understanding, and all of these kinds of things. And I was referring before to this idea that I only understand whether I understand by virtue of what test it is that I can pass. So at some level, that is what cognitive psychology actually is, right? It's the science of probing capabilities by developing assays that are essentially behavioral assays to make inferences about capacities and sometimes with the intention of making inferences about some particular theory about the nature of what it is that we have inside of our head. And, so the representationalism of cognitive psychology as articulated in the sort of maybe Fodorian kind of vision is something that neural networks, of course, have, challenged in a way. The fact that you can't point to the place in the transformer model where it has the explicit representation of this syntactic structure, but it behaves in accordance with the existence of such a structure and so on, is what we learn from having systems that exhibit intelligent behaviors, as defined by some measure. So I think that, it's going to be sort of Wittgensteinian forever, and that the different measures that we define are going to be useful for different purposes, and we wouldn't want to say that there is a single definition of intelligence. And I think that that's great, right? I think from my own point of view, I think that, but we want to just recognize that that's the way it is, and we shouldn't look for something, you know, that we could write down as a single sentence about that, in spite of how much I like your sentence about it. So I'll shut up.
Yeah, because I dared venturing a definition of intelligence. So I mean, I like your question because I think it makes us think outside of the box. I think we use the word intelligence to design. I'm trying to find the definition I tried to give, but whatever enables a system to act in a relevant and efficient manner in a given environment, right? And so this means that we should not focus on the sort of intelligence has the capacity to resolve abstract problems or logical problems, which is a sort of lab intelligence or paper intelligence, but whatever helps animals or social beings or societies to resolve problems is something good. So it is distributed, and we should not try to develop intelligence. We should try to resolve problems, right? And some of these problems might make some use of what we call artificial intelligence or robotics or software or data mining or whatever. But you know, we're probably barking at the wrong tree that by trying to develop something that mimics the logical capacity to resolve abstract problems or the chess game. I mean, the chess game is not an ecological interesting problem, right? And so you're perfectly right to ask us, I mean, what tree are you barking at, right? And perhaps there's nothing behind that word, and it's Wittgenstein 7.0 in the Tractatus. And it doesn't matter. What matters is solving the problems that societies now are going to face, and they're urgent. So thank you for that question. We don't have a generic response, but we should look for a lot of specific responses to all the problems that we're facing, and some of these can be addressed by the kind of devices that we're developing. That would be my pragmatic answer to this.
Yes, thank you very much. So I want to say that I agree with Sven and Toshio that the ideal answer will be not to replace human care, but having robots as tools. Okay, so this is said. But I think that we can recognize that is already happening, especially during the pandemic, that care robots replaced humans because in the home care business there is a lack of human workers. We assisted to this problem, right? And it is an economical problem. So my question, and structural maybe problem, right? So my question is, and it is very fundamental, I know, but why do we want to invest in care robots instead of trying to remodulate and working also from a political point of view in making a better and more just society? Yeah.
I'm sorry, there's not so many care robots. There's just one kind of robot, which is called Paro, as Toshio could say, which is the best robot at this time, 10,000 Parrot over the world. But it's for specific use. There's not a universal robot, and we will not have universal robot, but we will have some device to help the people, to turn people in their bed, to change the people, to clean them. But there are specific care robots are just instrument at this time. But and they're just helping in tasks. They are not have autonomy to do tasks. Parrot is just an assistant of emotional relation in sociability of people with Parkinson or dementia. But it's not more than that. We don't have, it's a real question. Do we want to have some people who visit the elders to fix the robot, or do we want to have people, assistants social, to take care of them? Yes, it's a real question. But at this moment and for a long future, the presence of care robot will be very specific and very specialized.
Rosa-san, thank you very much for asking question. There are two types of kind of care robot. One is a kind of physical kind of support. assistant. Second, you are maybe talking about kind of intelligent kind of life, sort of things, assistant, something like that. So physical kind of assistants, there are many kind of things was designed, also kind of made for production. For example, if you need a power, just wearable robot, wearable, you just wear. Then that you can lift up more heavy, much heavier kind of thing here. So two-way, that the caregiver wear such a kind of wear robot to lift other people, okay, care, or to take care of the kind of patient, transfer from bed to chair, wheelchair, for example. It takes a lot of time. So many people who doesn't have such a kind of wearable going to have such a kind of pain eventually with the back pain. So that to prevent such a pains, the people tend to use such a kind of a wearable robot. So it's good for caregiver. Also, another one is a kind of the patient who has some problem to just walking kind of one step down, one step up, so like such a level one. If the patient wears such a kind of wear robot, then she or he cannot ask somebody to help to just lift up, okay? There are such a kind of robot already, a lot. So you can buy it, just $1,000, so you can buy it, okay? There's no problem about it. Such a physical, such an assistant. Now is a more kind of physical assistant to go to some others, okay? Other domain means whoever eating or carrying those things or moving around the kind of mobility wise, okay? That's a many physical assistance. But once you go to such a kind of some kind of emotional or intelligence kind of support, that's a problematic. That can need such a kind of talk with them. And of course, with the area such a kind of robot, watch out. Where he or she going? Maybe going around, get lost. So that's why the robot will go with it. So those still kind of maybe might have such a kind of ethical problem with that, but just kind of following where you are, so to take back them to home, something like that, or tell the kind of supervisor, or he or she, he's here, please come pick them up back home, something like that. That's a good. But if you go beyond those things, then there is a kind of ethical problem. That's why LC is always there. So LC is an ethical problem and a legal problem. Once you can solve such a legal problem, then we will have a very nice kind of maybe we can improve more in such a in terms of social impact. That's a kind of thing. So there must be good kind of discussion with about the robot, how it can be used in such a care robot in terms of LC. LC stands for ethical, legal, and social impact. That's it. That's what we're always pushing in my project too.
Thank you very much, Osho-san. So we have to close now, but I understand that what comes out of all this discussion is that we cannot develop AI or robots independently of how they will be used in connection with the rest of us humans, and so we should not design this as a separate science. It's a social science, it's a societal and technical issue, and they will not be alone. They will be with us, and so we should design them with us. on this note, I would like to thank our panel and the public, and please give them a round of applause because it was difficult and hot. And I would like to thank you all, and the Intercontinental Academia is not finished, it's going to continue, but at this moment we'll have a pause and we'll be able to talk and go out for drinks, and this is just as important between us humans. Thank you again.